Hello everyone, this is Pal Ponder on Weather. In this update, we're going to be watching closely on an upcoming snowstorm and then next week on a pattern flip that's looking really interesting. Welcome back everyone, how's it going? Go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe if you hadn't subscribed already. I do daily updates on this channel to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's get right into it this morning. Let's take a look at the overall 500 millibar on the northern hemisphere view, and you can really kind of see what's really happening out there underneath these red little blobs. That's your area of high pressure, and a lot of that's your sinking air and much warmer air. So that's pretty much going to be dominating for much of our western states, and some of these areas actually could eclipse their daily record high temperatures as we're going to be watching a trough out here. Going to be aligning, pulling some much colder air, especially by Friday into Saturday time frame, pushing all the way into the south and portions of the southeast, and that could combine with the trough that could set up off the east coast and could be producing our upcoming snowstorm for later into the weekend going into Monday. So we'll be fine-tuning that scenario as we get closer. But how we stand for winter so far, we all know December was well above average. We had all that severe weather that took place in December, and then we had well above average temperatures as well. So for January, these are your average means so far. We had slightly above average temperatures for portions of the west, but much of the central and eastern 2/3 of the U.S. saw at least average or slightly below average, and you were kind of well below average up here in the upper Midwest. And then of course with that really Arctic front last week, for February, so far for the first week of February, we are well below average temperatures. So we've seen a big flip in the overall setup for weather. And let's take a look at the snowfall. I mean, here's where we stand as far as snow, and it really starts counting basically around September 30th, and it goes all the way through October 1st. So that's your yearly snowfall and how we stand pretty much year to date. And some of these, and you can see the graphic on the right hand corner of the screen, where some of the snow that reached all the way into portions of into Texas. I mean, look at this little snow down here in the southern Alabama here. So it's snowed in places that typically don't really see snow, but we'll fill in this as we get deeper into it. And there's no more snow hole in Indiana. That got eclipsed last week with that snow that took place with that pretty Arctic outbreak that took place. So let's take a look at the setup, because this week things have really kind of calmed down in kind of a big way. So it's been very active back to back in weeks, and then typically you see that you have a little bit more calmer type pattern. We're getting what they call a more or less a zonal flow off the Pacific. That's a warm flow. It's a flat flow, and there's not much instability in that type of air mass where you under these ridge of high pressures. That's going to be basically your sinking air, and high and dry for much of the west and portions of the south. And this is on Wednesday, so we're going to be watching these clipper systems in the meantime come across the upper Midwest, and the Great Lakes is going to bring some snow showers as well, some lake enhanced induced snow showers as well. But as we get into that, Friday time frame, we've got excessive heat watches. Yes, excessive heat watches that actually take place starting Wednesday in portions of Southern California into Los Angeles, where they're going to be experiencing temperatures in the 80s, folks, if not upwards to almost 90 degrees in spots. And that's why they've got those excessive heat watches with widespread 80s and 70s along the West Coast underneath that ridge of high pressure. For portions of the south and southeast, that's a nice day. There's a lot of sun, so basically soak up the sun while you can, because things are going to be changing next week in a big way. So yeah, right now, going into Friday time frame, ahead of that Arctic front, you're going to experience some really nice temperatures for a good chunk of the country. But as we get into that Saturday morning time frame, you can see definitely as that Arctic plunge will make its way out of Canada and start entering the upper Midwest and portions of the Great Lakes with these high temperatures going into the single digits, as it's going to be making a beeline. And a lot of these areas are going to be experiencing their higher temperatures closer to midnight, as you're going to be falling during the daytime hours on going into Friday into Saturday time frame. as much of the West won't really experience that cold front as you're going to be experiencing, again, daily record high temperatures possibly, and the Super Bowl could be actually experiencing their warmest temperature ever by the time we get into Sunday, possibly with temperatures well into the 80s. So as we get into, going into that Saturday time frame, you can definitely see where these blue lines interact. That's the area of instability as it comes across. And of course, Arctic air is your driest air. So it's got a 1041 Arctic high pressure along with it, but there's not really much instability. You got a lot of dry flow off the Pacific, and much of the midsection of the country and much of the West won't be experiencing any rain or snow from that particular cold front. But as it interacts going into portions of the Southeast and the Ohio Valley, it is going to be interacting with the surface low that's going to be developing. So we're going to be watching that closely as it traverses off the East Coast, possibly as we get into that Sunday timeframe going into Monday for Valentine's Day. So yeah, there's your low temperatures as you get into that Sunday morning. So there's that Arctic air mass plunging southward. We've seen colder air masses than this, so it's not the most significant Arctic outbreak, but it does have definitely some colder air with it, where you're going to be going back into freezing temperatures for much of Texas here and much of Oklahoma into Kansas and portions of the Southeast. We're going all the way down to Louisiana, experiencing some of those 20s, while again, much of the West is really not going to be seeing that cold front. But things are going to be changing as we get into next week. But we're going to be watching in the meantime this interaction of this very cold air. So it's got plenty of cold air to work with into the mid-Atlantic as well as the Northeast here, as these low temperatures start to creep down as we get into that Sunday time frame. So yeah, now let's kind of zoom out and take a look at the overall ensemble members, because yeah, we are watching that area of instability come down with that ridge of high pressure pushing it further along. So the darker the blue colors here, that is your more unstable air and more instability type atmosphere. So we're watching the strength of this ridge off the East Coast here, and is that going to be enough to be able to amplify and pull this storm upwards and create a snowstorm? So we're still kind of timing and fine tuning this out as we get deeper into the week. But yeah, looking at by the time we get into Monday, that's not a pretty bad setup with this ridge off the West Coast here, with this trough coming down, digging down into the North Carolina here, with that ridge kind of blocking it off here at the East Coast. So we're going to be watching this as this is trying to amplify and kind of all come together as we get into that late Sunday into Monday timeframe. And the European is even a little bit more bullish and a little bit more amplified with this particular setup. And of course, we're not looking at operational guidance. We're looking at ensemble member guidance, because we're basically 6-7 days out from this event right now. So this is typically what you would look at, kind of an overall average. So it's not looking like the best particular setup, but there's definitely area of concern, and say, hey, we should be looking at this area closely and really kind of fine tuning this as all the pieces of the puzzle really start to come together. As we get into that Sunday and Monday time frame. Because if you look at the areas of energy, again, this is not the best negatively tilted trough whatsoever, but again, it's definitely highlights an area of concern with these isobars really start to tighten up along the Carolinas here. And if this is able to turn and really turn up the East Coast, we could be looking at a pretty good snowstorm. So we'll be watching this as all this areas of instability comes together. But we got a lot of drier air for much of the country this week, as the atmosphere really kind of settles down and really more or less resets itself. But as we get into next week, that's when things start to get a little bit more interesting, because going back into the northern hemisphere view, you can definitely see the big difference, right? That area, that blob of ridge of high pressure, it's not parked itself over much of the west here. Now it's backed up significantly. So what that would be able to do is, obviously that would allow the areas of instability to push into places, into Montana, going into portions of the Pacific Northwest. That underneath that blue area, that would be typically your colder air mass and more instability. So underneath that, you would have your more or less your rain and your snow underneath that. And you can see as we zoom in, looking at more of the surface view by then, Yeah, so now it's not high and dry anymore. So by the time we get into that Tuesday, February 15th time frame, now we've got snow breaking out in Idaho and Montana and going into Wyoming, back in Nevada here, as well as Utah. So these places have been pretty dry, right? So now that area of concern, area of instability, will be setting up shop a little bit further off to the west. So these areas that have been experiencing much drier air lately are going to be more in the zone as we get into next week. And so as that area of instability continues to push down, as the PNA continues to dive negative, that ridge of high pressure and that area of that trough will just continue to dive southward. And now it's setting up shop over Arizona and New Mexico. That's areas, places that really haven't seen much precipitation. They haven't really seen terribly that much snow as of late. Back into Colorado. So these areas in the midsection of the country has been actually pretty bone dry. So we're watching a little pattern flip, an area of these setups having a little subtle shifts. And all it takes is little subtle shifts in the overall pattern where these troughs come down, and in these areas that have been drier are going to be in more of the bullseye of the area of instability. Because yeah, by the time we get into that Wednesday's February 16th time frame, we've got more snow, even heavier snow breaking out in Montana. We've got more heavier snow into Wyoming, filtering down into Colorado now getting in back in, like I mentioned, New Mexico, into Arizona with snow and rain. As this continues to push further south, the deeper this trough amplifies, the further south it's able to get. And that's why the Climate Prediction Center has already went ahead and said, hey, we've got above average precipitation for much of Montana, through Colorado, through Arizona, portions of New Mexico here, and then much of Texas. And these are areas that have been bone dry and almost severe drought as of late, so they desperately need the rain. But that's a big difference in setup what's happening this week of what could take next week, as a lot of area of instability with colder air coming down, and we've got above average precipitation for a good chunk of the central and eastern 2/3 of the US. And then as we take a look at the drought, like I mentioned, we've come a long ways lately in the Pacific Northwest with a lot of that atmospheric river that had it's been a little bit drier as of late, but we had a lot of atmospheric river flow that really knocked down that drought that you were experiencing for much of the summer months. And even in California, we did a major dent in the drought with a lot of that rain that we had earlier on, and then all the snow we had in the Sierra Mountains here. But even into Arizona with that very active monsoon that we had this year in Arizona, that put a major dent in the severe drought. But now you can see these red areas that extends over Montana and a good chunk of Colorado, going into portions of New Mexico here, into portions of Oklahoma, into back into Texas. These areas that have above average precipitation for next week are areas that severely need the precipitation, because they're basically in a more or less a severe to an extreme drought in a lot of these areas. So that is just welcome precipitation in a big way. So now we got to figure out, how much of that is going to be actually rain and how much is that going to be snow, because the ridge is going to be still offshore here. We are going to be dry in much of the Pacific Northwest, but as this extends and as this pulls down much of the colder air as we get into the middle of the week next week, we are going to have that area instability to reach back into Mexico, back into Texas, into Oklahoma. So a lot of these areas will be experiencing much needed rain, and obviously where it's going to be able to get cold enough, some of that's going to be transferring to snow. So we got a lot to talk about next week and a lot to watch as this continues to traverse from west to east as we go throughout the week. And as it pulls down and just amplifies as we get it deeper into the next week and get into the next weekend, I really do feel with those above average precipitation, we're going to have a lot of active weather to contend with for a good chunk of the country, especially as we go into the central and eastern 2/3 of the country as we get deeper into next week, into next weekend. So as we go into that next weekend time frame, we got a lot to look out for, guys. So in the meantime, we'll be watching that upcoming snowstorm. But enjoy the sunshine. There's a lot of sun out there and a lot of Pacific flow this week, and not much happening right now. So I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Catch the latest update where I protect you before and after the storm.